So we are back at it again, and this is going to be a quick video. We're not going to do any configurations. We're just going to go ahead and talk about what would be on our CCNA exam objectives. That's going to be 4.1, configure and verify inside source NAT using static and pools. Okay, so we're going to talk about NAT, and when you think of NAT, I want you to think of network address translation. There's three types. You have your static, you have your dynamic, and you have your PAT. Okay, static, dynamic, and PAT. PAT stands for port address translation, and believe it or not, the PAT is actually the most common NAT. Okay, let's go ahead. Static NAT, that's a one-to-one mapping. So that means for every one public IP address, mind you, public IP addresses cost money. So you have to pay for a public IP address via whether it's your company, whether it is companies, or what have you. For every public IP address, that is costing money. That costs dinero. So that's something that when you use NAT, you can go ahead and have the opportunity to save money, not to mention the fact that their public IP addresses are essentially, when it comes to version 4, there isn't that many and they're running out. Henceforth, they came out with the RCF 1918, which is actually, this is a solution to solve some of those problems with regards to decreasing IP addresses. So static NAT, just think one-to-one mapping. For every one public IP address, you're going to go ahead and you're going to have one private IP address. This is typically for servers. Okay, and as you can see here, these are the command lines for these are rather the commands for the command line in order for you to configure what would be your router. Okay, so let's go to the next one, dynamic NAT. So dynamic NAT is essentially the same idea, okay, but in this case, you're gonna have a pool of addresses, okay, and we'll get deeper into this. We can make a video. Once again, we're just doing a quick little overview of what PAT NAT is, which includes PAT. But you have your static NAT, you have your dynamic NAT. Dynamic NAT, instead of a one-to-one, now you're gonna have an allocated amount of addresses, and it's going to be based on a first come first serve. First come first serve. When one PC is not using that public IP address, it can go to the PC that is, and vice versa. Okay, and this is typically for computers that want access to the internet, but the internet isn't trying to have access to those computers. Okay, let's go to the command line. You can see it's a little bit more complex than the static. Okay, and we can talk about this here. You basically have an additional two commands, and we'll get deeper into the commands as we will make a video with regards to the commands. The last one, guys, and this is the one I want you to remember: PAT, port address translation, one to many mappings. Okay, so now you have the opportunity to have one public IP address, and you can essentially go ahead and configure all your networks. Okay, this is the most common port address translation, one to many. Okay, one to many. So you have one public IP address, and you can use that same public IP address that you can go ahead and use for basically your whole network. Don't quote me on that. Obviously, there's a lot of caveats and whatnot, but the idea is the same. One public IP address is going to go ahead and configure the whole network. Best way to think about this, guys, is your internet at home. Okay, you basically have your internet service provider. Okay, and if you realize that you have your laptop, you have your computer, you have other laptops, you have tablets, you have your iPhone, you have your Android, what have you, those IP addresses, okay, that you would mostly see, a lot of those are private IP address, but your internet provider basically provided you with what would be their public IP address. Let me go ahead just to actually, we'll leave it there. So this is a quick little overview. Just remember, when it comes to network address translation, there's three types: static, dynamic, and PAT. Static, one-to-one. Dynamic, you have a pool. PAT is basically one to many. So just think of this as a bigger pool, where dynamic would essentially be limited to, say, maybe five public IP addresses. You could only have five end hosts using those particular I public IP address. With Pat, you can have one public IP address, and you can have a lot more end host using what would be their private IP address. So that's it for today. We'll leave it there, and we'll go ahead and make another video with regards to our static.